Okay, so let's talk now about how we can use a scatter plot to make a prediction, because when we draw these trend lines that we drew in the previous video, we're using those trend lines to make predictions. That's the whole point of a scatter plot. We collect data. So this is statistics. This is data stuff. So we collect a whole bunch of data, and then we figure out what kind of pattern it is, and then we use that pattern to see if we can make some other conclusions, if we can predict some other things that might happen. So the whole point of collecting this data, well, there's 2 points. We want to see if there's a relationship. If there is a relationship, we want to use that data to predict. Okay, so first of all, let's get some background information. So that line that we drew here, that with the positive correlation, we call that a trend line. We also call it a line of best fit. And that line represents the general pattern between two variables on a scatter plot. So again, when we look at this was not the exact line. We didn't connect all the dots, but in general, this is what the data looked like. In general, that's what the data looked like. Okay, so it shows a general pattern between two variables on a scatter plot. We absolutely never connect the dots on a scatter plot. We draw a trend line to see what the data is trying to tell us. So when you look at a scatter plot, okay, so these dots, they tell us what did happen. So that tells us that's the data that we collected from other people. So we collected a bunch of data. So we said, okay, you know, like, we went to some store, we went to some little kiosk or like a bodega, and we said, hey, how much ice cream are you selling? Okay, and how many sunglasses are you selling? And we plotted that, you know, when you sold 120, so like on some day I sold, you know, 110 or like 110 sunglasses, and I sold $190 worth of ice cream. Okay, so they plotted all these different days and they saw this pattern. Okay, so this data, these dots tell me what did happen. They tell me the data that absolutely was collected. The trend line tells us what we can predict might happen. So I take that trend line and I predict, okay, if I sell 260 pairs of sunglasses, I'm probably going to sell about $700 worth of ice cream. So I can predict that if I'm selling a lot of sunglasses, I'm selling a lot of ice cream too. And I can make a prediction of about how much money I'm going to sell in ice cream sales based on how many pairs of sunglasses I sell. But I don't use the dots to do that. I use the line. Because, like, for example, if you look, oh, I can't see one, but if you look right here at 190, do you see how right here at this point on 190, my line doesn't go through that point. I have a point right here. That point is 400, but my line says 450. So in general, if they asked me to make a prediction, I would predict the point on the line, not the point that I see. Because prediction is what will happen. The dots are what did happen. I don't want to know what did happen. I want to know what's going to happen. I want to be able to make a prediction about what will happen. Okay? So we always look at the line. The line is what we use to make a prediction. Okay? So a trend line follows the shape of the data. And I would say maybe, I might even go so far as to say the general shape, but we had general pattern up here. It follows the shape of the data. And it's used to show the relationship between two variables. And yes, we call that relationship a correlation or an association, but really it's a relationship. We're looking, are these two things related? Okay? Now, this is important. A trend line may or may not pass through one or more points on a scatter plot. So like I said, when we looked at this one I drew here, it passed through some of these points, but there were a whole bunch of points it did not pass through. Okay? So it may pass through a point, it may not pass through a point. And another really important one to say is trend lines do not always begin or pass through the origin. Okay? A lot of people, when they draw a trend line, they kind of want to make it go through 0, 0. It doesn't. The line goes where the data goes. Again, I take my badge or I take my index card and I slide it into the data, and then I look to see what does that pattern tell me? What's the data telling me? Okay? So let's look at some examples, and let's look at some predictions that we can make. So this one already has, this first one here with the height and weight of babies already has a line through it. Okay, so they've plotted what did happen. So again, what this means is somebody had a baby that was 20 inches long and 8.5 pounds. Somebody had a baby that was 21 inches long and 8 pounds. That's what these dots mean. Somebody had babies that had this height and weight combination. So in general, it looks like this line. So by looking at the trend line, we can predict that a baby that's 23 inches long in height is expected to weigh some number of pounds. So how do we figure out what that number of pounds is? Okay, well, since I have a trend line drawn here, I go to 23 inches and I look. Whoopsie. Right here at 23 inches, it's right there. It's about 10 to 11 pounds. So I'm going to say, I'm actually going to say he weighs, well, let's see, 23, closest to 11. So he weighs, I'm going to put the little double equal sign, about 11 pounds. Okay? You could say 10 to 11 pounds, that's fine. You're going to look for an answer if it's multiple choice that's between 10 and 11 pounds. Okay? Let's look over here now. This one doesn't have a trend line. So for this one, we have to draw our own trend line. So let's draw a trend line. This one's tough because it looks like it's kind of narrowing down. Again, your trend line may not look exactly like mine. Trend lines are, that's a problem with like drawing a trend line. And I'm going to teach you how to get the calculator to draw that trend line for you, the Desmos calculator. But for now, this is kind of where we're at. So it says, now by looking at it says you can predict. So what do I predict off of? The dots or the trend line? I predict off of the trend line. So by looking at the trend line, you can predict that someone who watched 5 hours of TV would get how much sleep? Well, I'm going to say about 4 hours of sleep. Okay? Again, it might be 3 to 4. Your line might go through 4. My line goes through 3. Again, but it should be really close. They should be close. Again, because we're not, again, I'm not going with the top number down to the bottom number. I'm not going with the first, you see what I'm saying? I'm going where the data shows me. So I don't start at either of these points on the y-intercept unless it makes sense with what the data is telling me. Okay, let's look at this one. So this is comparing car value in thousands and years since purchase. Okay, so again, I see data. I'm going to try and get myself a trend line. Look at this. It looks like it's about here. Okay, by looking at the, what do I look at again? I look at the trend line. You can predict the value of a car that was purchased 10 years ago, years since purchase, 10, would be between $18,000 to $19,000. So I would say, $18,000 to $20,000. I might say 19,000. I might say 18 to 19. The reason why I'm saying 18 to 19 is because this line is really small, right? And so I'm not positive exactly where that's going to be. Tomorrow we're going to go through the rounds and we're going to actually practice some of that trend line stuff together in class. If you have any questions, let me know.